Hey everyone, sorry I couldn't do this in person given the current circumstances. Uh, my name is Alan Dukes. I'm a mental health nurse with Early Intervention Service. We specialise in supporting people with psychosis, and we're pretty much a trauma informed service because there's a massive link with psychosis and trauma, people's past trauma and stuff. So I also kind of do meditation teacher and do some kind of consultancy wellbeing work for a local charity as well. So what I thought we could talk about today is just some stuff around understanding how the body works and the brain works under stress, under circumstances where under trauma and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to use a model which is derived from compassionate focused therapy. And the evolutionary psychologist that developed this model is called Paul Gilbert. And he uses basically evolution as a means to understand how we can come to terms with understanding anxiety, understanding stress, understanding worry, and using it as in it's just an evolutionary thing that's happened. And if we're able to understand it from that perspective, then we're able to bring a little bit more self-kindness, self-compassion, rather than kind of criticising ourselves, getting into that state of anxiety and stress without us being aware of that situation. So, on your screen, as you can see, to this side of me, then his model kind of takes into consideration of back in the caveman years. So as you can see, there's three modes within our brain. So we've got the drive mode, we've got the soothe mode, and we've got the threat mode. So we'll focus on the threat mode to start with, and basically the threat mode is our fight or flight response. And our fight or flight is basically in our body, you guys know this, is cortisol, adrenaline pumps into your body and you get ready for a fight or a flight. So if we take this back to caveman years, then what happened is all animals have this mechanism, and let's take the zebra. So the zebra's out in the open, and he sees a lion. Lion starts to chase the zebra, and his amygdala kind of kicks in and gets the body ready for a threat response. Zebra runs away. He's pumped full of cortisol, lots of oxygen into the muscles, and he starts to run. Zebra eventually gets away from the lion, and what happens then is the zebra kind of scans the environment, susses out what's going on around him, and senses no threat. Smells no threat, sees no threat, senses no threat. Amygdala switches off and the body returns to its natural state. The zebra can graze or whatever it does and it goes back to its balanced state. Now take the human back in caveman years again, and same situation. So caveman's out, lion starts to chase him, amygdala kicks in, he either fight or flight. So usually you're not going to fight a lion, so you're going to run away from it. So same situation with the caveman. He pumped full of adrenaline and everything else, and eventually gets away from the lion. Now he gets back to his camp, and what does he say to his wife and kids? Never guess what's just happened to me. I've just been bloody chased by a lion. So there's a different response compared to other animals and humans. There's a different response when the threat isn't there in front of them. So yeah, the caveman gets back and then he starts to think about it and starts to talk about it with other people in the camp. And then on a night, he then is still in that mode of what if. So And what happens? He's laid in his bed and he's going, what if that lion had got me? What if that lion had eaten me? I'd have left my wife and kids and blah blah blah. You get the gist. So the difference with other animals compared to humans is we have this overthink mode, and that overthink mode is useful, but also can be also our demise. So it's helped us move through evolution, and our species has survived because of this mechanism. So if we look at like a situation where this day and age, then what you've got is people sometimes very stressed, sometimes very worried, and they're constantly in that mode of stress, even though sometimes that stressful situation isn't even there around them, because we have this overthink mode. Our imagination runs away with itself sometimes, or we get caught up in the reflection of the event, and our body and our mind can't tell what's real on the inside, what we're thinking of, and what's actually happening on the outside of us. So that's a basic concept of your threat mode. We all have it, we all need it, we all need it online, because we need it in situations where if we don't have it, then it's something which we need to respond to in threatening or difficult situations. So it's a healthy mode that we all have. Now let's kind of look at the drive mode. So the drive mode is responsible for our goal focus, our goals for the future, our goals for the here and now. It drives our focus right in to pay attention to something that we've got right at hand, sort of very small tasks, and it gets us into that flow state. Now, in this situation, then it's usually, we need it on a day-to-day basis to get us up and all that type of stuff. And I'm not really going to focus on this mode that much, but we still need it to get us up, get us about, goal focused stuff, goals for the future, goals for the here and now. And then we have the soothe mode. Now our soothe mode is the mode where we feel loved, we feel protected, we feel safe. It's the mode which helps us heal, so we move into that. So we've got if I was to kind of use the threat mode and the soothe mode as the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic is your threat mode and your parasympathetic is your soothe mode. So this is the mode where we're able to problem solve better, we feel calm, we feel loved. One of the main chemicals that's responsible for this mode is oxytocin, the cuddle hormone as it's kind of nicknamed sometimes. So these three modes are natural modes that we have in our brain and our bodies. Now imagine a situation where, so I'll kind of give you the situation where one mode is bigger than the other. So let's pick the threat mode. Now, if people are in threatening situations all the time, or traumatic situations all the time, or very stressful situations, so if people are kind of struggling with chronic stress, then the threat mode, because it's a physiological thing that's happening, then that threat mode grows and it gets bigger than the other two modes. So it becomes the more dominant situation, becomes the more dominant mode that we kind of tend to view the world from. So I'll give you a quick example. People with PTSD, people that have been in war situations, people that have witnessed car accidents, people that have witnessed horrific accidents and all that type of stuff. Sometimes their threat modes will be larger than other people's threat modes, because if they're seeing them type of things on a regular basis, then their body is priming itself to predict another event just like that. And working in A&E and working in critical care wards and all that type of stuff, then you might get people's threat modes will be bigger because of them situations, because what people witness in them situations. So, and if we have a threat mode where it's grown bigger than the other two modes, then you get off balance. So you then tend to view things in a very threatening way, or in a very stressful way, or a very worrying way. Most of the time, it changes our perception. So there is some evidence kind of linked to the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory, and that kind of looks at when people are in threat mode a lot of the time, whether it be anxiety or chronic stress or kind of trauma, then we're perceiving the world slightly different as if we were in soothe mode, our healing mode. So what they've discovered through the polyvagal theory is that when we're in our stress mode, the high frequency and the low frequency muscles within the ear are switched on, and what they think is happening is these ultra high frequency noises and ultra low frequency noises were linked to predatory noises. So when we're in that kind of threat mode, then those two muscles are switched on and looking in our surroundings for threat on a constant basis. On the other hand, with our soothe mode, with our healing mode, or our parasympathetic nervous system, when that's switched on and when that's kind of on high activity, them two muscles switch off or become down regulated, and the middle ear muscle kind of switches on. And that middle ear muscle is more tuned into social noises, human voice, that type of thing. So it's sometimes, whatever mode we're in, we will perceive the world in that type of way. And it's not just a psychological thing, it's a, you know, these are physiological responses that's happening in the body. So you've got them three modes. And like I said earlier, is if, and I'm going to focus on the threat one because sometimes that's the one that becomes more of a problem to us. But even if we have a big soothe mode and our threat mode is really small, so if you had a person who loved meditation or from California and loved all the hippie stuff, and they have a really big soothe mode but a very small threat mode, stick them in a threatening situation, or stick them in a war situation, or they had to go to in conflict, then they might not manage as well. They might be meditating on a hill and get shot in the head because they wouldn't see threat as much because their threat system is smaller. So we have to have, the key to this message is we have to have a balance between all three modes. These three modes are natural in our body and our minds. And if they're nice and balanced, then we can use them when we need them, and then we can bounce out of one and into the other when we need it. But if we're in that constant stress mode, or we're seeing a lot of trauma, then our threat mode's going to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to get big. And then it becomes a lot more difficult to kind of move naturally with kindness into our heal mode or our soothe mode, because we've grown that over time. Subconsciously, we've primed our body to be in that mode a lot of the time. So the key is to look at, once we're aware of this, what Paul Gilbert says is that if we can understand our mind from a physiological perspective, not just a psychological perspective, is it creates a little bit more kindness to ourselves. What tends to happen a lot of the time when people are under chronic stress or suffering from depression or anxiety or trauma, then people blame themselves, and we have this inner critic that blames ourselves for these situations. Why is this happening to me? Why am I feeling this way? I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm weak, and all this type of stuff. So our inner critic becomes very negative, and we start to blame ourselves for things which are actually natural. So in threatening situations, our threat mode will switch on, but sometimes we'll blame ourselves for that, and we shouldn't, because it's something which is just entirely natural. If we know these modes, then we're able to think, right, what mode am I in right now? And how can I move out of that mode if I need to? So if you've had a really bad day at work or a traumatic day at work, and you've been in threat mode all day, which is understandable and natural, is then think, do I need to be in threat mode at home with my family or friends? And if we're aware of that more, then we can kind of start to put techniques into place that helps us move naturally from that threat mode into our soothe mode. So we're able to kind of just take that step back, use techniques to move into that zone, and then we're able to bring balance to our system a little bit more easier. So a lot of Paul Gilbert's work is around self-kindness, compassion to self, and once we begin to understand what mode we tend to be in a lot of the time, we can then start to think, do I need to kind of bring a little bit more balance to these three modes in? Do I need this one online all the time? Or do I need to look at how I can train myself and train the body to move out of that when I need to? So we have a little bit more control and power over not just being in constant stress and constant chronic anxiety and worry and that type of thing. So I want to quickly move on to, I don't know whether you've heard of the stress bucket. I'll put it on screen now. And it's basically a really good tool to use in situations where if we become overwhelmed with stress, then it can fill our bucket up right up to the top and it can spill over. And that spilling over situation is different for everyone. So some people can spill over into lots of anxiety, some people can spill over into depression, psychosis, bipolar, what was termed many years ago as a nervous breakdown. So it's being aware of our stress buckets in our heads. So if you imagine this bucket in your head and whatever we've got in our lives that keeps us happy and resilient, then it's keeping them things in play. So the stress does pour in, because it will do, and in jobs which is quite traumatic, or if you witness a lot of trauma, then that's going to happen on a day-to-day basis. But if we can then take things which we feel that we're able to look after ourselves, or hobbies, interests, friends, family, whatever it is, we're all different, is those are the holes, those are the taps in the bottom of our bucket. So stress pours in, but then we have lots of outlets for that stress to pour out naturally. And when that stress pours out naturally, then we've got a nice constant flow. So you're always going to get stressful situations. And a lot of times stress is not a bad thing. It's sometimes it's a good thing to keep our body primed for challenges and growth. So if we can sometimes have that in our heads, that right, am I full? Is my bucket filling up? And do I have all the right things in my life right now that's going to keep that nice flow where stress does pour in, but is easily poured out through our hobbies, our friends, talking, all these outlets that help us keep a balance in our system. So stress tends to be known in society as a bad thing. Stress is bad for you. Long-term stress is something which we need to avoid and get rid of. But there's lots of studies that would suggest that stress is also a good thing. There's a good TED Talks on YouTube, and the lady is a health psychologist. She's called Kelly McGonigal, and she talks about how to make stress our friend. So, and it all boils, I won't get into it too much, but it all boils down to, if there was a big two or three big studies. If you watch the kind of the TED Talks, it kind of explains it in a little bit more detail. But long story short, changing our perception of stress changes the physiological responses to stress in the body. So there was a few studies done in America where people who perceive stress as a good thing, a challenge, an opportunity to grow from, then their bodies didn't have much change. So under stress, typically when we're stressed, our blood vessels shrink, so the blood can't get through our vessels as easier. But people who perceive stress as a good thing, what they measured is their blood vessels didn't change, they were very open, and blood flow could kind of get through to the system quite easily. Where if people perceive stress as a bad thing, then their blood vessels were very, very small and it constricted the blood flow. But have a look at that, because it's quite an interesting little talk around if we change our perception of stress, then it has limited or minimal effects on our body and our systems. So what I want to move back to is, if we go back to the Gilbert's model, it's called the motor regulation systems. It's our ability to bounce from them three modes with ease and with control. And if we train ourselves to do that, then we're able to sometimes switch off one and move into the other quite easily. And that's just called balance. So what Paul Gilbert kind of looks at is moving from self-blame, inner critic, negative inner critic, to self-kindness, compassion. And understanding it from an evolutionary perspective is basically, hands up, who asked to be on the planet? No one. No one asked to be on this planet. So sometimes why do we blame ourselves for the way we feel, for the way things have happened to us, for the way we judge or the way we kind of perceive things? These things, a lot of it is physiological responses to the environment outside of us. And if we're able to think, this is okay, this is just how the body works under these circumstances, we're able to take a little bit more control of the situation and practice new ways to be kind to yourself. So it's a lot of techniques at the moment. There's lots of trend around mindfulness and meditation and that type of stuff. But what it does for the body, I'll kind of give you a quick, and you guys will know anyway. But when we're breathing under stress, we're not breathing in a balanced way, in a coherent way, and that causes a lot of oxidative stress, which basically is rusting your cells, basically. So what breathing does, breathing correctly or breathing in a systematic way, it creates or restores balance to the body. So there's a thing called the Heart Math Institute, and they're measuring a lot of stuff around when we're able to control our breathing and bring breathing to a balance, then it has effect on our heart rate, and it has effect on kind of our relationship with the heart and the brain. And once we can control our breathing, then that regulates the heart rate a little bit easier. And then there's messages that's sent up to the brain saying you're in a calm state. So it actually up-regulates the parasympathetic activity. We're in that mode a little bit more, due to basically just breathing a little bit more systematically and through rhythm. So yeah, there's loads of techniques, breathing techniques, meditation. There's tons of research and evidence to suggest that doing breathing techniques or just focusing on the inner self and getting to know the self creates more activity from the parasympathetic nervous system, the healing mode. We tap into that a little bit easier if we can kind of just breathe and go into a situation of calm and relaxation. So it's not just meditation and breathing, it's things where, you know, if we look at the soothe mode from earlier, is oxytocin is the biggest kind of chemical that's responsible for our soothe mode. And it's the cuddle hormone, so it's kind of being around others as well that kind of moves us back into that healing zone where we're able to get our energy back from a hard shift, or if sometimes from a traumatic event. We're able to kind of just take a step back, move into that system naturally, and then what we're able to do is refocus and it brings balance to our mind and our body. So what I want you guys to leave with is the message that when we go through trauma, when we're under stressful situations, when we are witnessing lots of stress or worry, that can take its toll on us. And the key message here is, if we can understand how our mind works and our body, then we can become the mechanic of our mind. If we know what's under the hood, we know what to deal with. If we don't, we're working blind. So sometimes it's very helpful. The model that I've kind of presented today is a fantastic model to use to just bring that balance back. If you're a person that's out of balance, if your modes are a little bit off kilter, then sometimes having that model in our heads, as in, where am I at right now, it gives us that onus to then think, right, what can I do to kind of bring balance and move into that soothing system a little bit more. Because in hard times, if we're able to regulate and if we're able to bounce from that threat mode back into that heal mode, that soothe mode with ease, then stressful situations, anxiety provoking situations and traumatic situations tend not to have greater impact upon our bodies and our minds. We're able to use it in a situation, but then use the soothe mode to kind of heal from it and kind of get back into a situation where it creates balance. And the key message I want to leave you guys with is just be kind to yourself. When we go through trauma or we're in a stressful situation, we tend not to be kind to ourselves. But if we witness others going through traumatic situations or stressful situations, most of us are always kind to another person. Why can't we do that to ourselves? And using this model will hopefully help us be a little bit more kind to ourselves in troubling times. Thanks guys, I'll see you soon.